Welcome back, guys. We got another episode of Napoleon's Marshals. Glad you're here with me. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and let's just jump right into it, shall we? We got a lot of marshals to talk about.
Terror belli, decus pacis. Terror in war, ornament in peace. The words inscribed on every French marshal's baton. In France, the title of Marshal or Maréchal goes back at least to the 13th century. It represents the highest possible position of military authority. Authority symbolized by a marshal's baton. The title was abolished during the French Revolution as incompatible with the egalitarian spirit of the age. But in 1804, Napoleon founded a new empire and restored the ancient rank.
Yep.
This is Epic History TV's guide to Napoleon's marshals.
Part 2.
All 26 have been ranked according to our own evaluation of their achievements as marshals, with expert guidance from retired Lieutenant Colonel Rémy Porte, former chief historian of the French Army.
Got some good expertise here.
So far, we've met Marshals Perignon, Brune, Serrurier, Kellerman, Grouchy, Moncey, Poniatowski, and Jourdan. 18. Marshal Bernadotte.
I can only say that Bernadotte let me down. I can accuse him of ingratitude. Wait, shit. I can accuse him of ingratitude, but not of treason. Of course, this is the guy that takes over Sweden.
Bernadotte enlisted in the French Royal Army aged 17 and proved a model soldier, rising to become the senior non-commissioned officer in his regiment in just 10 years. The French Revolution and active service opened the door to rapid promotion. He was made an officer, and thanks to exemplary leadership and courage, rose in rank from captain to general of division in a single year. Not even Napoleon rose through the ranks as quickly. He particularly distinguished himself at Fleurus, leading an attack that helped secure Jourdan's famous victory. As a professional soldier and ex-sergeant major, Bernadotte insisted on the highest standards of discipline and conduct from his men. He even fought a duel with his own chief of staff, whom he accused of taking a bribe. In 1797, Bernadotte was transferred to Italy, where he served under Napoleon's command for the first time.
And of course, that's where we know a lot about him when we were looking at the Italian campaigns.
By this stage, both men had brilliant reputations, but despite a good first meeting, a clash of styles and jealous rivalry soon emerged between them.
Oh.
What's more, Bernadotte had immediately got on the wrong side of the future Marshal Mortier, Napoleon's chief of staff, by arresting one of his friends for insubordination. In 1798, Bernadotte married Napoleon's ex-fiancée, Désirée Clary.
I missed that, I guess. I don't remember that at all.
Her sister Julie was married to Napoleon's brother, Joseph, meaning Bernadotte was now family. But when Napoleon asked Bernadotte to support his coup of 18 Brumaire, he refused, though he did not actively oppose it. Napoleon suspected Bernadotte of conspiring against him, but the Clary sisters helped to keep the peace. Throughout this period, Bernadotte held key posts as Minister of War in 1799, Commander of the Army of the West in 1800, and Governor of Hanover in 1804, proving highly effective in each role. That year, Napoleon made Bernadotte a marshal, and he commanded 1st Corps at the Battle of Austerlitz, playing a relatively minor part in the Emperor's great victory. Nevertheless, he was rewarded with the title Prince of Pontecorvo.
Pontecorvo?
But his relationship with Napoleon remained difficult. In 1806, as Napoleon took on Prussia, Bernadotte was blamed for failing to support Marshal Davout at the Battle of Auerstedt, and was nearly court-martialed, though Bernadotte partly redeemed himself with a vigorous pursuit of the beaten Prussians. The next year, he missed the Battle of Eylau after his orders were intercepted by the Russians, and a gunshot wound to the neck meant he also missed the Battle of Friedland.
A gunshot to the neck? My God. You don't really hear that not hear casualty, or not casualty, death after that, so that's crazy that he survived.
With command of 1st Corps passing to General Victor. When war resumed with Austria in 1809, Bernadotte was given command of the 9th Saxon Corps. On the evening of the first day at the gigantic Battle of Wagram, his troops were in heavy fighting with the Austrians. But dressed in white, like the Austrians, they came under devastating friendly fire, panicked and routed. The next morning, Bernadotte pulled his men back without orders, and when they later retreated again, he and the Emperor exchanged sharp words on the battlefield. Bernadotte then issued a proclamation to the Saxons praising their conduct and outraging Napoleon. Bernadotte was sent in semi-disgrace to the Dutch coast to oversee the defeat of a major British landing at Walcheren. But another triumphant proclamation, effectively publicizing the strength of his forces, further infuriated Napoleon. In an unlikely twist of fate in 1810, Swedish politicians invited Bernadotte to become Crown Prince of Sweden.
And how does that even happen is what I'm thinking, because you have a body of water separating them. Unless they saw how he was at being governor of Hanover, because that's really his only politics here. So why was he invited?
The current king was old and childless, and Bernadotte was a proven general and administrator, member of the French imperial family, and well regarded by Swedish army officers, who remembered his fair treatment of Swedish prisoners 3 years earlier in Pomerania.
I mean, still, that's a wild recruitment.
Napoleon was at first bemused, remarking that he could think of other marshals who were better qualified, but he did give his assent, even when Bernadotte made it clear that as Crown Prince he would pursue Swedish interests.
And we'll see that later.
He was true to his word. 3 years later, with Napoleon on the ropes after his disastrous invasion of Russia, Crown Prince Bernadotte brought Sweden into the 6th Coalition and declared war on France.
It's a lot easier to come into the coalition too, not just because of, he hated his ex-boss, which I think they bumped heads, but I think it was more respect thing versus just like a hatred. Now, Britain, being the purse of all the coalitions, basically, really influenced the Swedish crown to jump into this, because it's nationalist aspect of it, trying to keep his crown. We saw the same thing with Murat in Naples. There's just an aspect of trying to hold on to power, but also being incentivized by 5 million francs or whatever it was.
With his insider knowledge, he helped the Allies to devise the Trachenberg Plan, a strategy for defeating Napoleon in Germany by avoiding battle with Napoleon himself and targeting only his marshals.
It kind of worked!
In September, Bernadotte defeated former comrades Marshals Oudinot and Ney at Dennewitz. 5 weeks later, he played a major role in the great Allied victory at Leipzig. Bernadotte's legacy would prove the most lasting of any of Napoleon's marshals. The royal house of Bernadotte sits on the Swedish throne to this day.
That's insane, man. That's insane butterfly effect right there, because all those things you see at the bottom left, 1780 to 1810, every single one of those things just slowly trickled into him being the crown. And because of that, King Carl the 16th, King Carl the 16th is now still. That's crazy.
Bernadotte was labelled a traitor by Napoleon's supporters, though not by Napoleon himself. He was unquestionably a gifted soldier and administrator.
I'm sure he thought the same thing about
But his
Murat.
personality clash and long-running feud with the emperor meant he was never a great marshal. 17. Marshal Augereau.
His courage, his outstanding virtues elevated him far above the crowd. But honors, titles, and money plunged him back into it.
Augereau had, by his own account, an eventful younger life, serving at various times with the French, Russian and Prussian armies, deserting or being kicked out of all three in dubious circumstances. He briefly earned a living in Dresden as a fencing master, with a feared reputation as a duelist. He embraced the French Revolution and joined a volunteer cavalry regiment known as the German Legion, before holding various staff and training roles where his experience in the regular Prussian army proved valuable. Promoted to general, Augereau served in the Eastern Pyrenees, where his flair for tactics and bold, decisive action helped win a series of victories over the Spanish. Later serving in Italy under Napoleon, Augereau proved a highly effective divisional commander. The future emperor's reports were glowing. Strong character, firmness, energy, has the habit of war, liked by his men, and lucky. In 1796, Augereau played a leading role in Napoleon's victories over the Austrians at Castiglione and Arcole. In fact, the painting of Augereau's heroism at Arcole Bridge long predates the more famous version by Vernet, in which Napoleon takes centre stage, and is an even greater work of fiction.
Is even a greater work of fiction? Wait, which side is a greater work of fiction? Because I think on the right's more fictional, right?
Augereau's standing among fellow generals, however, was damaged by an enthusiasm for looting to rival General Brune, while others were irritated by his loud and boastful manner. Augereau was known to be a reliable Republican, and in 1797 Napoleon sent him to Paris to be the military muscle for the coup of 18 Fructidor. This was an army-backed purge of pro-royalist politicians threatening to restore the French monarchy. A brief spell in charge of the Army of the Rhine demonstrated that Augereau was not suited for high command, as his unruly entourage and obsession with plunder caused chaos at headquarters.
The Rhine area has been difficult for a lot of people, though.
As a Republican, Augereau initially opposed Napoleon's seizure of political power, but soon sensed which way the wind was blowing and pledged support.
Of course.
Created a marshal in 1804, status, wealth and declining health served to mellow Augereau's behaviour. He commanded 7th Corps in the 1805 campaign, but was held in reserve and missed the great battles of Ulm and Austerlitz. The following year, he was in the thick of the fighting at Jena, leading 7th Corps against the Prussian southern flank. At Eylau in 1807, Augereau was so ill he had to be strapped to his horse, but led 7th Corps into battle in terrible winter conditions. Ordered to advance,
We already know what happened.
his corps lost its way in a blizzard, was mown down by Russian guns, charged and virtually destroyed. Augereau himself was hit and crushed under his own horse. He returned to France to recover.
The fact he survived that is just unbelievable to me.
But was never the same again.
Oh yeah.
His
How would
energy
you-
and zeal were gone. During Napoleon's war in Spain, he was sent to replace Saint-Cyr as commander of the Army of Catalonia. He completed the grim 7-month siege of Girona, but was soon replaced by MacDonald for his lackluster performance. In 1812, Augereau commanded depots and reinforcements in the rear, as the Grande Armée marched to its destruction in Russia. However, at Leipzig he was briefly back to his best, inspiring his small corps of conscripts to fight for several key villages in the south, in the face of relentless Austrian attack. In 1814, Napoleon gave Augereau command of the Army of the Rhone. But he surrendered Lyon without a fight, and on news of Napoleon's abdication, denounced his former emperor.
Wherever the wind blows, I guess.
As a man who, having sacrificed millions of victims to his cruel ambitions, has not known how to die like a soldier. When Napoleon returned from exile in 1815,
Don't tell me that he went back to Napoleon.
Augereau proclaimed his loyalty once more.
This guy's a snake.
But the emperor was not interested. Augereau was stripped of his baton and died the next year.
Damn.
16. Marshal Lefebvre.
Okay, I was trying to figure out how to pronounce them, so the B is silent. Marshal Lefebvre. A truly brave man who does not concern himself with the maneuvers on his left and the right, but thinking only of fighting well, and is not afraid to die.
François Lefebvre was a sergeant with 16 years' service in the elite Garde Française when the French Revolution broke out. When the Guard was disbanded, he became an officer in the Paris National Guard and received the first of many wounds protecting the royal family from an angry mob. Every inch the soldier, the Revolutionary Wars brought Lefebvre opportunity for active command and rapid promotion. In just 2 years, he rose from captain to general.
Very similar to how fast Mr. Napoleon rose.
Establishing a reputation as a formidable divisional commander, a good tactician, brave, energetic, and attentive to the needs of his men. His chief of staff, the future Marshal Soult, acknowledged that he learned much from Lefebvre's example. In 1799, Lefebvre commanded the Paris military district. Not much impressed by politicians, when Napoleon asked him to support a coup, he was all for it, declaring, "Yes, let's throw the lawyers into the river."
I remember that.
In 1804, Napoleon made Lefebvre an honorary marshal. Honorary because Napoleon assumed Lefebvre would prefer a quiet life in the Senate, after a decade's active service with the scars to prove it. But he'd underestimated Lefebvre, who pleaded for a frontline role. So the emperor gave him command of the Imperial Guard infantry for the Jena campaign.
And the Imperial Guard is almost like a reserve anyway, to where you're not going to be in the front line unless you're talking 1814, 13, 15.
The next year, Lefebvre commanded the siege of Danzig, inspiring the troops of 10th Corps by leading one counterattack in person.
Wow.
After the successful conclusion of the siege, Napoleon awarded Lefebvre the title Duke of Danzig.
That's big.
Lefebvre's record as a corps commander was mixed. In Spain, he exasperated Napoleon by twice ignoring orders. But in 1809, when Archduke Charles of Austria launched a sudden attack on Bavaria, Lefebvre's Bavarian 7th Corps was crucial in slowing the enemy advance, until Napoleon arrived to take charge. He was then given the difficult task of suppressing a popular revolt in the Tyrol, led by Andreas Hofer, which he achieved despite some early setbacks. For the invasion of Russia, Lefebvre commanded the infantry of the Old Guard. During the retreat from Moscow, the 57-year-old Marshal insisted on marching on foot at the head of the Guard all the way. At the end of the retreat, he was devastated to learn that his son, a 27-year-old general, was among nearly 100,000 men who had not survived the march. He had been Lefebvre's last surviving child.
Wow.
of 14. After a year recovering from exhaustion and grief, Lefebvre returned to lead the Old Guard one last time in the defence of France, and was in heavy fighting at Montmirail and Montereau. But in April 1814, he was one of the marshals who confronted Napoleon with the reality of his position and forced him to abdicate.
I mean, that's many. I can't remember who was not in favor of abdication. Who was? I can't remember who they were. There was a couple, I think, but the majority were in favor of abdication.
Lefebvre and his wife, an ex-washerwoman turned duchess, were famous for their lack of airs and graces, for honest, blunt speech, and for always helping out old comrades. When a friend commented on Lefebvre's wealth and titles, the marshal invited him into the courtyard. "I'll have 10 shots at you with a musket at 30 paces, he told him. "If I miss, the whole estate is yours." When the friend declined, Lefebvre added, "I had 1,000 bullets fired at me from closer before I got all this."
That's pretty good.
Lefebvre was too exhausted to take an active role in the Waterloo campaign, though he accepted a role as a senator under Napoleon, which led to a brief period in disgrace when the Bourbons returned.
I wonder what happened politically, like, to a lot of these people after the Bourbons. I mean, we're kind of racing over a little bit of it, but like, I'd love to take a deeper dive.
His rank and honours were restored to him a year before his death, in 1820.
Mortier.
15. Marshal Mortier.
The 3 best of my generals, Lefebvre, Soult, and Bessieres. Mortier was the most feeble.
Edouard Mortier was from a prosperous middle-class background in northern France. When the French Revolution began in 1789, he volunteered for the National Guard, a new middle-class militia charged with preserving order and defending against counter-revolution. When war broke out with France's neighbours, Mortier's unit was sent to the front. Standing 6'4", Mortier was conspicuous for his height and bravery, being wounded twice and winning praise from his commander, the future Marshal Lefebvre.
It's not good to be that tall in war, you know, because there's too much surface area. Bullets can fly over your head if you're 5'8", 5'7". But when you're 6'4", this makes it a little bit easier for you to get hit.
In 1799, Mortier fought under General Massena's command at the Second Battle at Zurich, helping to defeat the Russians and winning promotion to the rank of General of Division. Mortier then spent 3 years commanding the Paris military district. His efficiency impressed the new First Consul, Napoleon Bonaparte, who chose him for an important mission in 1803, the occupation of Hanover, a German state belonging to the Hanoverian kings of Britain, with whom France was, once more, at war. Mortier carried out this assignment with tact and diplomacy, ensuring the occupation was unopposed. This delighted Napoleon, who rewarded him a year later with the rank of Marshal. Following Napoleon's victory over the Austrians at Ulm in 1805, Mortier and his new 8th Corps led the pursuit of the retreating Russians, but became encircled by a much larger force at Durenstein. Mortier fought his way out of the trap with a nighttime bayonet charge, a remarkable escape, but his corps suffered heavy losses. Mortier and 8th Corps were in a supporting role for the Jena campaign of 1806. But the next year at Friedland, his corps played an important role holding Napoleon's left wing, as the Emperor inflicted a devastating defeat on the Russians. Mortier was well liked by all, and almost uniquely did not engage in feuds and rivalries with the other marshals.
Was that just like a 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 13, 20? I guess that's all of them.
And almost uniquely did not engage in feuds and rivalries with the other marshals. Oudinot was a particular friend. In East Prussia, their party trick was to snuff out the candles with pistol shots. They always paid generous compensation for damage caused. In 1808, Mortier joined Napoleon for the invasion of Spain and commanded 5th Corps at the brutal siege of Zaragoza. He then helped win a series of victories over Spanish forces, including the crushing victory at Ocaña, operating alongside another friend, Marshal Soult. Mortier was recalled to France to organize and train the Young Guard, a new junior unit of the Imperial Guard, made up of...
That's why it's called the Old Guard versus the Young Guard. I was kind of wondering about that.
The best conscripts from each year's intake.
Oh, okay.
Mortier led the Young Guard in Russia in 1812, but was powerless to prevent the Corps' destruction on that campaign. First through exhaustion and disease on the march to Moscow, then on the retreat, where his surviving troops were effectively sacrificed to hold open the road at Krasny and allow the army's escape. Mortier continued to command the Young Guard during Napoleon's campaigns in Germany and France, and was never far from the action. At Lutzen, he was trapped under his wounded horse, was in heavy fighting at Leipzig, and had his hat shot through outside Paris. In 1814, the final defence of the French capital fell to troops under Mortier and Marmont, with support from Marshal Moncey's National Guard. Mortier told his men, "We have not enough troops to resist their large armies for long, but today, more than ever before, we are fighting for our honour." When Napoleon returned from exile in 1815, he wanted Mortier to resume his customary role at the head of the Young Guard, but a severe attack of sciatica prevented him joining the Emperor at Waterloo.
Interesting.
Napoleon never regarded Mortier as suitable for major independent command, but his loyalty and conduct were always beyond reproach. He went on to serve the restored monarchy as ambassador to Russia and briefly Minister for War. In 1835, he was riding beside King Louis-Philippe in a public parade when an assassin opened fire with a homemade multi-barreled gun.
Why?
The king received a minor wound, but Marshal Mortier and 17 others were killed.
Let's back that up real quick.
Beside King Louis-Philippe in a public parade when an assassin opened fire with a homemade multi-barreled gun. The king received a minor wound.
Multi-barreled. That's like a 7-shot pistol or something like that. I get it.
But Marshal Mortier and 17 others were killed.
17 hours.
14. Marshal Marmont.
I was betrayed by Marmont, who I could call my son, my child, my creation. Vanity was his undoing.
Marmont, like Napoleon, was a trained artillery officer and met the future emperor for the first time at the Siege of Toulon.
They go back.
Where Napoleon made his name. They formed a friendship, and when Napoleon was given command of the French army in Italy, he took Major Marmont with him as an aide-de-camp.
Best friends.
Marmont distinguished himself at several of Napoleon's early victories in Italy, and was commanding his own artillery regiment by the age of 23. As part of Napoleon's inner circle, Marmont accompanied him on his expedition to Egypt in 1798, fighting in the battles of Alexandria and the Pyramids. Naturally, he backed Napoleon's coup of 18 Brumaire, as Napoleon overthrew the Directory and made himself first consul of France. 6 months later, Napoleon led an army over the Alps into Italy. It was his artillery commander, General Marmont, who figured out how to get the cannon through the mountain passes using man-hauled sledges.
Okay, smart man.
At the ensuing Battle of Marengo, Marmont's skilled handling of the artillery helped Napoleon to win a decisive victory over the Second Coalition. 2 years later, Marmont was made Inspector General of Artillery, working with Napoleon to implement reforms that improved firepower, mobility and supply. Marmont was bitterly disappointed not to be among the first marshals created in 1804. But he was still only 29, and Napoleon assured him that time was on his side. He was further frustrated in 1805, when his corps was sent to guard the army's strategic southern flank, and so missed the great victory at Austerlitz. The spoils of that war included Dalmatia, which Marmont was sent to govern in 1806. Though he lived in extravagant luxury, his reforms and infrastructure projects were so effective that even the Emperor of Austria later admitted, "It's a great pity that Marmont was not in Dalmatia 2 or 3 years longer."
Okay, so smart man. And we can say that just because all the way back from like when he was able to, move cannon through the Alps, this guy knows how to solve problems.
When war broke out with Austria again in 1809, Marmont marched north with 11th Corps to join Napoleon near Vienna. But at the Great Battle of Wagram, his troops remained in reserve, while the other corps were engaged in ferocious fighting. At last, an opportunity to prove himself came as Napoleon ordered him to pursue the retreating Austrians. But reckless overenthusiasm nearly led to disaster at Znaim. A week later, Napoleon created 3 new marshals: MacDonald, Oudinot and Marmont. MacDonald for France, it was said, Oudinot for the army, Marmont for friendship.
Out of the 3, that's kind of the least, like, I don't know, it's just almost like a pity marshal status at that point. For France, for the army, and because he's my friend.
Napoleon then rather undermined the moment by telling Marmont, "Between ourselves, you've not yet done enough to justify my choice."
Oh my god. That's what I'm
His
saying.
big chance came in 1811, when he was sent to Spain to replace Marshal Massena. But after a promising start, and some bold manoeuvring
I mean, look who he's going up against, though. Wellington and guerrillas.
Against the British on the Douro River, he stumbled into disaster at Salamanca. Marmont himself was an early casualty of the battle, badly wounded by a shell burst and carried from the field, as Wellington routed his army.
Yep.
After convalescing in France, Marmont was back with the Grande Armée in 1813, as Napoleon battled to save his empire. He commanded 6th Corps throughout the campaign in Germany, fighting at Lützen, Bautzen and Dresden. At Leipzig, he held the northern sector with skill and determination, making Blücher's Prussians pay a high price for the village of Möckern. Marmont played an important role in Napoleon's 1814 defence of France, shadowing Blücher's movements along the Marne River and guarding the road to Paris. But by now he was showing signs of exhaustion and disillusion. At the Battle of Laon, he allowed his corps to be surprised by the enemy, with heavy loss. Napoleon's stinging criticism may have been the moment that ended Marmont's loyalty. He was the senior marshal in Paris when the Allies attacked on the 30th of March. After a day's fighting and facing inevitable defeat, he negotiated the city's surrender. 5 days later, with Napoleon at Fontainebleau still planning to march on Paris, Marmont marched his corps over to the Allied lines and surrendered.
Yep, remember that.
Napoleon was shocked at this betrayal by one of his oldest comrades. He'd already been
This picture of Napoleon always is like the most defeated looking photo I've ever seen.
persuaded that he must try to abdicate in favor of his 3-year-old son.
Too late.
Now he accepted that he must abdicate without conditions. Whether Marmont acted to save lives, out of self-interest or spite, or a combination of all 3, remains the subject of heated debate. We do know that he was well rewarded by the restored Bourbon king, and never forgiven by Bonaparte loyalists. As military
Let's look at this real quick. Becomes chief military advisor to King Louis XVIII. Knighted and made a peer of France. Commands a company of the Royal Guard, the Judas Company. Judas. That's interesting.
Were forgiven by Bonaparte loyalists.
That's interesting.
As military commander of Paris in 1830, Marmont could not prevent the next revolution and had to flee France.
I have no idea about the July Revolution. I'm going to love to learn about that.
He spent the rest of his life in exile, becoming tutor while he was in Vienna to Napoleon's son, the Duke of Reichstadt. He was the last of Napoleon's marshals to die, in Venice in 1852. Bernadotte, Augereau, Lefebvre, Mortier, Marmont. 13 down, 13 to go.
Halfway there.
Join us for part 3.
It seems like, you know, out of these individuals right here, I feel like there was kind of a distrust, but kind of like, but they're still my friend type thing. Bernadotte obviously was his family legend. It's continued to this day. Augereau is always going to be overshadowed with his woes, but also at the same time had a very long and illustrious career. Lefebvre, I can't remember too much about Lefebvre. Like, hold on. Yep. His son died on the retreat. I remember that. Not like a star in all this, but still someone to be reckoned with. Who else are we working with? Mortier. Who's, I would say, I can see how he's in the middle of the pack, depending on what else the others accomplish as we kind of go through it. I mean, just look at the major battle honors from 1793 to 1814. So he was a career Napoleon backer. And then, of course, Marmont, where he really established himself early. Went to Egypt, fought Marengo Wagram, then went to Spain, then Germany, then finally back at home. Marmont feels like he was a very patriotic marshal, patriotic to France versus just Napoleon. I'm gonna probably continue. Like,
command.
I'm gonna probably watch this entire thing through. When I say like the entire thing, like all the marshal videos through, and then we'll go back and just really become a sponge and soak up the differentiations, because of there's so many between these marshals. Some of them so superficial, but some of them with such deep past and lineages to this day. Yeah, this is fun. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment. Tell me real quick, as we're going to do this on every single marshal video. Just on these 6 down here, from Bernadotte to Marmont, which one is your favorite? Which one's your least favorite? Maybe tell me why. For me, Marmont is my favorite. Just because he was a true patriot, from what I can see. I don't know if I have a least favorite. I kind of just I don't like it when people just go with the win, like, yeah, I like this, and then I don't like this. So I forget who was that. I think it was Mortier, actually. But anyway, Marmont was my favorite. Let me know what whose yours is, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Bye bye.